Twitch, TV.
Make sure we're good there. Yes, we are good. All right.
I see us.
Gasp.
Wow, you're streaming at 1080p now, huh?
Yeah.
Nice. All right, let me pop out chat.
All right, let me go send out the tweets on the Twitter.
You are listening to the Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the Overwatch League news and information. The show with Tactical Visor on the statistics and analysis. Here are your hosts, Totally Drunk, Spider, and Slambo.
What is up, guys, and welcome back to Overwatch League Network. the podcast with Deadeye on all the latest Overwatch League news, information, and esports analysis. I am your host, Emily Drunk, and tonight on episode 44, we're going to go around the league discussing the latest Overwatch League news. We'll update you on the latest expansion team news, break down the Overwatch League first finals, and so much more. But before we can get into the news and introduce you to my co-hosts, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who is hanging out with us tonight over in Twitch for our live show, and of course thank all of our repeat listeners out there. Of course, as always, I have someone here with me to help break everything down. We're Sans Lambo for the third straight week, and there might be a reason behind that, which we will get into, but joining me tonight is my co-host Spider, and Spider, there's quite a bit going on. We got contenders, pretty much getting into the playoffs. We have the grand finals that just took place, whole lot of craziness, but how has your week been?
It's been very good, very good. I mean, we got, I would say top tier Overwatch over the weekend, which it was for the most part. I mean, it was kind of one-sided, which we will definitely talk about. But there was some good back and forth, and the first day particularly was closer than I would think people are giving it credit for. But other than that, like it was a phenomenal week. Like you said, we had contenders, we had grand championships. I got to play a lot of Overwatch with the Wrecking Ball. I mean, it was just a great week to be an Overwatch fan. We got to see it debut on primetime television, which we will also talk about how that went down. But overall, I mean, I had a good week. And, other than Overwatch, I've just been keeping myself busy. It was my son's 3rd birthday. So with all the grand finals craziness going on, there was a birthday party going on too. So we were partying like crazy.
Absolutely. So with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into this week's Overwatch League news as we go around the league. So we have an update for you on one of your teams, the Dallas Fuel, and they have made some additions to their coaching staff. And I'm pretty excited about this. Obviously, there's a pretty big name kind of attached to one of these slots, and they have added on 2 new assistant coaches. And we have Jane and Tickety. So each coach is going to be joining the staff full-time come September. And that's partially due to the fact that, there's this upcoming thing called, the Overwatch World Cup, where Jane just so happens to be the coach for Team Canada, who will without question be one of Team USA's top rivals this year, other than South Korea, because South Korea is everyone's top priority, given, the fact that they've won both World Cups so far. But Tickety was mostly known for being an assistant coach and analyst for F Energy FE, the Corn Dogs, where he had worked under Arrow. So, we got a bit of a reunion going on in regards to that duo. But, Jane is a pretty big name in Overwatch and streams, and this is a huge opportunity for him. Obviously, he does, like the Guess Your SR things that he does with YouTube submissions, which is always a good time. But his analysis is always spot on. And, we have to call out the fact that anytime Stylosa tries to do analysis, Jane is kind of like trying to explain him. And, Stylosa doesn't really break down the fights. And Jane was kind of just like, what? Why? No! That's not how it works. So I'm really excited for this change. And Dallas really, just given what we had saw in, just stage 4 improvements, this is definitely a team that is on the rise, and they're definitely putting themselves in a great position with their coaching staff. So I'm excited to see what exactly is going to come from this when it comes to, roster changes, who's staying, who's going. But all in all, I think they're making the right moves.
Definitely. I mean, this first season was basically a trial by fire for the endemic esports, who used to get by with, bare bones coaching staff. If they had a coaching staff, pretty much just using their players as the players themselves saw fit. And as season 1 showed us, the more you invest into a team, the better they're going to do. So like these endemic esports teams like Envious, not so much Cloud9, because Cloud9 did invest, but like the Misfits and Immortals and stuff like that, even in the earlier part of the season, they didn't put a whole lot of money into their coaching staff, and it really showed. So going forward, I am glad Dallas made this change because initially in the beginning part of the season, kind of bringing this all together is their main coach was Kai, and then they had two assistant coaches, really one assistant coach and one kind of player analysis coach. Um, and their results showed. I mean, look at stages 1 through 3, and they weren't even in the discussion unless they were a meme. So uh, going into stage 4, when they got rid of Kai, say what you will about him, but more so they just needed a base level coaching change. And this change on top of that will actually help Dallas in the long run. Now, you talked a lot about Jane and his analysis and stuff like that. I think he will be a huge boon to the team, regardless of how they shake out, because the team has a lot of very smart players when you look at them. Like they have Siegel, they have Taimu, they have players that are known to be rather cerebral, even Chips in some capacity. So I'm really excited to see Jane, join this team. I don't know how to expand upon it beyond that. I'm just excited because I'm a big fan of Jane. Like I like his work. I like his analysis. Like I've actually tailored my analysis style to be like his, just because his is so verbose. It is so, I mean, it's not the right way to do things, but it is definitely one of the better ways to do things in terms of analysis. So I'm just pumped all around. As a Dallas Fuel fan, I'm also repping Team Canada tonight just because of this news. I'm still rooting for Team USA, but I actually think Team Canada has a better chance to win from a player side. I think coaching is pretty even, but this is great news. I mean, any team that picks up coaches in the offseason outside of Seoul, which needed to get rid of a lot of coaches, which they did, is a good pickup. Like you can have too many cooks in the kitchen, but most teams don't have any cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, and just a quick update in regards to Effect. We do know that Effect is back in North America, and I know Arrow has been spending a lot of time with him. And there was a clip from one of Arrow's streams, and it really got me in the mindset that Arrow's definitely looking out for the players on that team. He's there not only as a coach, but he's there for the people as well. So hopefully Effect will get the help that he needs, and who knows, maybe Effect will be returning for season 2 with the Dallas Fuel. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. But moving on, we gotta talk about some expansion team news. So we actually got 2 updates over the course of the week. The first one was reported on ESPN. Actually, I'm pretty sure both of the news broke on ESPN, but Activision Blizzard is currently finalizing agreements for 2 expansion slots. So the organizations would represent Paris, France, and Guangzhou, China. So the Paris slot would become the second slot sold in Europe. This would be owned by McCourt Global, which is an LA-based holding company that owns French soccer team Olympique de Marseille. And then for Guangzhou, that spot is bought by the Nenkin Group, which is an umbrella company of a Chinese billionaire whose name I'm not going to attempt to pronounce. But they also own the Chinese Basketball Association team Guangzhou Long Lions. So, as we talked about prior, these expansion slots for Season 2 are in the range of $30 million to $60 million, which is an increase over what we saw for Season 1, which was, around the $20 million mark. And for Guangzhou, that would be the second team competing in China. As we all saw what the Shanghai Dragons did. Hopefully having 2 teams that will only increase their odds of picking up a win, and at least when they face one another, that at least guarantees a win for China. So that out of the gate will already eliminate any concern of another 0-40 season for the Dragons. So
Not necessarily.
Well, yeah, they lose. Okay, at least
0-40 season for China.
China will at least have a win, guaranteed.
Yeah, I mean, both of these teams are good pickups. This is about the region we both expected it in. China's a little bit of a surprise, but we definitely expected an EU team, and Paris isn't a huge surprise. So if these 2 teams do go through as they're expected to, I don't think anybody's going to be too surprised, and we may actually see some good China talent. Who knows? I mean, anything could happen.
Yeah, and it might not even be on Shanghai for that matter. I have to say, like, I'm not too surprised by getting another China team just because the population, and of
Right.
course the Chinese viewers always skewer the Twitch stats, and all of that. Oh, so the teams were announced. Well, they're still finalizing the agreement. So one of the teams would be representing Paris, France. The other one would be from Guangzhou, China. So it'd be the second Chinese team. So they're still working on that, but we do know that there's another slot that is confirmed to have sold already. And this is the second news bit in regards to expansion teams. And Activision Blizzard has sold a slot for Atlanta to a group funded by Georgia-based conglomerate Cox Enterprises, which Slambo works for this company, and he's not here.
GM confirmed. GM confirmed.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. So here's my thing, right? So I was browsing the Twitter, got a bunch of our podcast crew that was out in NYC, and Andre's from Omnic Lab, and Recap was like wanting to go in the subway, and like the look on Blevin's face was like, really, that was it? Like, and then that's how I felt when I saw this news. I'm like, really, Atlanta's gonna get a slot before Chicago? As you know, Adam and I have both been pushing for a Chicago slot, but like it's clear as day, Blizzard is just playing favorites to not only Omnic Lab, but my soulmate Slambo. So not cool, Blizzard. But anyways, they did have a representative from the group that attended the league finals on Friday, and they also participated in a private owners meeting back on Thursday. So this is actually going to mark the first venture into esports for Cox Enterprises, but this is a confirmed team. We do know that we will have an Atlanta team, so we're still hoping out for that Midwest team, but chances are it's getting less and less likely, so fingers crossed that we'll still get a Chicago team. But either way, Atlanta's still a very big esports scene, so I'm happy. I'm just not as happy.
It's a big deal. I mean, it's cool that somewhere in the South is going to have another esports team outside of Florida. I'm excited for an Atlanta slot just because that puts it a little bit closer to me. So, who knows? Maybe instead of the Chicago slot, maybe we'll finally get a DC slot. I mean, it doesn't. I would be happy with Chicago or DC. I think your region is one of the last regions that really needs one because it's one of the, I'd say, farthest from the existing teams in AL outside of the EU. I think EU gets a little rough as well. So, but Paris would actually fix that a little bit. Overall, I mean, until we know more, I can't really say much about this other than cool. I mean, more money for Blizzard, I guess.
Yeah, were you surprised at all, just based on the timing that we're already hearing about expansion team news, even though at the time the season wasn't over yet?
No, I actually fully expected maybe an announcement for expansion teams in the final, like maybe throw up the logos for one or two teams that had been signed, or at least the name. Maybe they hadn't done the branding yet because that seemed to come a lot later. But or at least where they were, like maybe at Paris and Atlanta were announced as teams to generate hype. Because I actually talked to you a little bit about it earlier, but the key to season 2 is how well they generate hype in this off season, and what better way to generate hype than get markets that aren't currently invested in Overwatch League invested because they know they're going to have a team next year.
Absolutely. So that was not the only announcement that we got during the grand finals, as we got an upcoming sneak peek at some legendary skins that are going to be released for the Overwatch League All-Star event. So the two that they showed were a Genji skin and a Tracer skin. So Genji was kind of like a fiery type theme, which would represent the Pacific team, while Tracers was more like Atlantis, like kind of like icy type colors, which would obviously cover the Atlantic team. So just as a reminder, the All-Star game will be dropping on August 25th and 26th. And during the 5-map series for the All-Star game, every player on both rosters is going to have to participate in at least one map. So, everyone is going to get a chance to play on the stage. So we don't know exactly if Blizzard plans on releasing more All-Star skins or how they're going to be earned. Do you think like this is going to be something that's rewarded by watching the Twitch stream, or is this going to be something that we buy via currency in-game?
Yeah, probably just currency in game. I would be surprised if they linked it to Twitch. I mean, it's fully possible because they did label them as all star skins. So maybe it's going to be the same thing where you have to donate bits. As long as they keep the bit donation low, I think it would be okay. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're just throwing out some goodwill and just let it be viable with currency. Because if you think about it, we haven't had a really good legendary skin that wasn't an event skin for quite a while. Um, Maybe there were the Blizzard skins when Blizzard World released, but that was months ago. Beyond that, I think these two skins are cool. I like the Genji one a lot more than the Tracer one.
Absolutely.
The Tracer one's a little weird looking, and it definitely won't replace what is it, like the spray paint Tracer for me. That's like the go-to skin for me. But Genji, I switch around just because I almost never play Genji. So whatever is the current hotness. But I'm cool that I think it's cool that they're doing this to tie it in. I'm just curious to see how they eventually do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you all know, the grand finals was this past weekend, and we got to talk about TV, right? Because this was a pretty big venture being on ESPN Friday night during prime time, and we do know what the TV ratings are. Now, there's been like a lot of numbers thrown around in regards to viewership, most of which, like the ones that Slasher threw out, were wrong because he doesn't understand how the viewership works, but I don't have exact numbers, but I can give you guys like a rough estimate about, where we are in regards to the ballpark for the viewership. So in regards to actual ratings on Friday night, which was on ESPN, it drew a .18 rating. They had a Saturday rerun, which was on ESPN2, that got a .05. And then Sunday, we had the ABC recap show, which drew a .3. And, like, with TV ratings, the ratings that are cited aren't for all of the viewers. It basically focuses on that 18 to 49 demographic. So, with that in mind, like, you're looking at, like, roughly 528,000 viewers for the ESPN run on Friday. The rerun on ESPN2 would have drawn, like, around 152,000. And then ABC was roughly 913,000. So, kind of like the numbers that Slasher threw out were like very minuscule because like he was only like he thought like the .18 was like 180,000, which wouldn't have been that much of a difference from what we saw on Disney XD initially. But all in all, like we kind of look back at that initial viewership on Disney, which was on a Wednesday night, and that drew 174,000 during the playoffs. And for Twitch, we saw it peak at 348,000 viewers, which that's a huge jump over what we've normally been seeing because, like, concurrent-wise, for the most part, like, throughout, Stage 4 and even during the playoffs, like, that was more than double what we were seeing on most occasions. So, the peak was on the second day of the grand finals. But, like, after looking at, where the numbers felt, like, initially, like, I was, like, kind of, like, scoffing at the numbers. But, like, once I looked into it more, I'm a lot happier than what it was earlier today because I was going off in the staff lounge. But all in all, like, TV is a very curious thing. The numbers for, sports have definitely not been doing so hot. And, esports, at least in regards to TV broadcasting, is still relatively new. More so on ESPN for that matter. But regardless, like, I was happy to see such a big jump for the ABC numbers just because, that was on, a more global network, really, and one that's available in more households. So to see it jump almost 400,000 is absolutely massive.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about network cable TV, you have to remember that Friday night is traditionally the worst slot in primetime TV. I mean, they're obviously like 2 in the morning is worse, but for primetime TV, Friday night is the worst slot, regardless of what it is. It could be the best show that networks are currently running. Friday night is where cable networks put shows to die. So the fact that this still did as well as it did, for being a new esport, for being, a completely new venture for ESPN, is actually, pretty, I don't know, pretty heartening. Like it shows that there is a chance for upward momentum. ABC's numbers were really good. I think that helped because Sunday is typically a better time slot, just because a lot of people are home watching sports, or they're home like I was having a 3-year-old birthday party, and you can just throw the TV on. And ABC is a core network, so you don't even need a cable package. Like I don't have cable because Hulu, Netflix, Amazon, who needs cable anymore? But uh I was excited to see it on TV. Now I didn't watch it because I had already seen it. But overall, I think this is good news all around for it. Slasher's doom and gloom numbers were wrong. I mean, I knew that immediately because I know at least how TV ratings work and demographics work and stuff like that. So I knew it's not necessarily like a 1-to-1 ratio. So overall, you can compare it to other primetime sports, and sure, it didn't do as well. Like, the biggest comparison was the previous Friday night. They had boxing on, and boxing drew almost double the amount of ratings that Overwatch League did. But you have to remember, boxing is a much more established sport. So the fact that, Overwatch League was able to do half of that with almost no advertising, that I didn't see any advertising for ESPN. I didn't hear any advertising for ESPN from any of my friends, any of the people that know I enjoy Overwatch. They typically like, oh, hey, I saw an Overwatch sign, stuff like that. So for as low key as Blizzard went into this, I actually think they made out pretty well. So when you consider, they probably had over 1 million people total watching it at certain times. That's a win over 100,000 of stage 4. So, next season we'll shoot for 2 million. Who knows?
Yeah, that's really like the big thing. It's like in this downtime, like how much advertisement is there going to be? Because obviously we got a ton of new brands coming in with the expansion teams, and we have more season of contenders. We got the World Cup, things like that. But like I know like when I was on YouTube. On like Instagram, I was seeing stuff for the grand finals, but like not anything like TV specific. So that's definitely something that they might want to look into just a little bit. But we have kind of seen in the past, advertising isn't necessarily the Overwatch team's biggest assets. So
those car commercials are actually really funny. I like all of them. I hope we get like the bad player endorsement commercials. Like, they did like the photo shoot with Custa for Otter Pops. I hope we get like actual commercials. Like, I'm Custa from the Valiant, and I only eat Otter Pops. I would love to see that, because that right there would legitimize Overwatch League 100% in anyone's mind as a sport as soon as you get the bad player endorsement.
Yeah. You know what else would legitimize it? Not having DJ Khaled perform. So
I wasn't gonna bring that up.
The only thing I'm going to bring up with this is the fact that we went from having Apex karaoke in Korea, which was hilarious and not cringe, to what we got for the grand finals, which was I don't even know how to put it in words. It was that awful.
He did not know his audience.
No.
I gave him the benefit of the doubt, because I'm like, look, he's there in front of 20,000 people that aren't there to see him. Most of them are, some of them don't even know who he is or have no interest in his music. And he did the best he could. But there were just certain times that you got to know your audience, and you got to be like, look, these people are not going to sing along. They don't know the words. They don't know the songs. Like, for every one person that knows the song, there's probably 5 that don't. So just play your songs, I actually think he's a very talented DJ. Obviously, he wouldn't get to where he is now without having some sort of talent. But he completely misread his audience on that one. So, I mean, that maybe next time they'll go back to karaoke.
We can only hope. Because then we could bring in Miro the Rap God, and he'd hold down the fort.
Put Uber up there, man.
Yeah, there you go. He is the new Rap God. I mean, we've seen those Reddit posts on the competitive Overwatch Reddit. Heck yeah. All right, well, that's enough with the news bits. Let's go ahead and move on to our main discussion, which can really only be one thing. We gotta break down what went down in the grand finals. So, in regards to results, it was a 2-0 victory in favor of the London Spitfire. So, yeah. So, okay. Normally, we don't have a lot of time for analysis. Tonight we do. We're gonna take this map by map. So I don't know if you just want to like alternate or just take it one set at a time. But we opened up the first set on Dorado, and the Fusion come out running the Reinhardt with the Zarya on their attack. With the Spitfire coming out with the, traditional triple tank double sniper comp, which we see time and time again since solo support is so damn good right now. So we see Nuss pop an early Valkyrie, and Prophet ends up falling to a poison mine after he got dipped low by Carpe. Gesture does manage to escape a Graviton Surge by fortifying out of it, but London's defense basically just crumbles early on. So we start to see some adjustments going into that second phase. So really no surprise we saw the swap to dive tank. So Bedozin ends up moving back to Zenyatta from the Roadhog. So Jester comes in looking for the backline, and he does end up finding both Neptuno and Carpe. Carpe throughout this entire Grand Finals was not Carpe-esque in the sense that there was a lot of pressure put on him and a lot of windows were taken away from him, which we'll talk about because statistically Carpe put up the worst performance of the season, basically, in the Grand Finals. The Fusion end up getting split by Prophet's Dragon Strike, and Neptuno gets caught out by Bedosian. And this is where London really starts to move forward with their defense. They start bringing that aggressiveness, which really gives Fusion a whole lot of problems in that second phase. But they finally start to gain some momentum after EQO finds two with the Dragon Strike. And, Spitfire end up going to the high ground at this point. But they get forced off by another Dragon Strike, and then this is where EQO really starts to take matters into his own hands. Gesture tries to look for a little bit of stall with the Primal Rage towards the end of the second phase, but he gets backed away. So unfortunately, they weren't able to hold him there. But Dorado's one of those maps where that third phase is really hard to complete, and you could see why. Fury ends up getting demeched, and the Fusion are just keeping the Spitfire back in their spawn after they get backed into it by a Dragon Strike. And Birdwing and Prophet start to come alive at this point. So Birdwing at this point is looking to either counter or just match Carpe hero to hero. So, we saw him on Genji at one point, really getting in Carpe's face before eventually falling back to that Widowmaker for the final point. And Nuss ends up using his Valkyrie, and that was the go sign for the Spitfire. But Hotba comes in big with the self-destruct, which takes out Gesture. And, main tank's kind of across the board. I know Sato definitely was the first to fall in a lot of situations, but it was the same case with Gesture. It just didn't happen as often for the Spitfire. So we end up seeing the Dragon Strike coming across the payload from Prophet, but this is where the Spitfire at this point are just trickling in, and Boombox just holds down the payload with that Transcendence. And we saw a late Dragon Strike coming through, but at that point, Fusion end up completing the map in overtime. So not the smoothest run, but a lot of the opportunities for the Fusion were opened up by EQO on the Hanzo. So all in all, EQO was definitely one of the carriers for the Fusion in these other playoff series, and that was pretty much true for the Grand Finals as well, because damage-wise, he still was a top dog on the Fusion, but, with Carpe not having the best performance, there's only so much the rest of the team could do on this point.
Yeah, I mean, the first point really looked right out of the gate, it looked like Carpe was struggling just due to pressure. So a lot of it fell on Hotba and EQO, which is, what we saw pretty much the whole series was it came down to EQO and whatever off tank was currently playing to make the kills. That's basically summation of this whole Grand Finals. But I was actually really impressed with Philly's first push, just because they did have their tailored aggression. They did actually, despite Carpe not really popping off, they did keep up the aggression more so than I would have thought they would have been able to. And it definitely crumbles in the later maps. So I would probably say on attack, Philly looked like old Philly. Like they looked like the decent Philly. Sure, Carpe had a off game or an off map or an off series, however you want to summate it. But really, honestly, this map gave me hope that we would have a very close, you know, grand finals until the Spitfire went on offense, and that was a turnaround. If you want to go through the offense, then I'll go through all the stats and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the Spitfire attack in this one, early on it was basically a snowball. So Sato was the first one to fall on the fusion, and Prophet got a really early Dragon Strike that ends up catching Neptuno. And that one kill really opened things up for the Spitfire, who just cruised straight through the first point. So really not a lot of contesting going on from the fusion early on. So of course, going into the second phase again, we saw adjustments coming out from both sides, with both sides opting to run dive tanks with Winston and the Diva. And this is where Birdring tries to get on a high ground on the right-hand side. So, he's looking to go for the flank side on the Widowmaker, but Sato was up there, and he ends up, chasing Birdring. He does eventually get him, but he basically just, ends up overstaying his welcome and kind of gets caught out in that moment. So Prophet ends up finding 2 more eliminations. And this is where Gesture starts to move forward and just chases down the Fusion as they try to, back away. And it gets to the point where Gesture is at the spawn door, just, trying to keep him at bay. So Spitfire, they just cruise through the first 2 points of this map, and they have around, 4.5 minutes left to complete the map. And then this is finally where, we start to see the Fusion bring it back a little bit. So there was a lot of, quite a bit of stall coming out from the Fusion on the last point. So Gesture ends up going in too deep and ends up falling late, which causes a bit of a stagger. And Prophet is trying to catch the Fusion in their spawn with a Dragon Strike, which brings out the Transcendence from Boombox. And, we start to see some more adjustments coming in from the Spitfires. So we have Prophet moving over to the Brigitte. Which, spoilers, Prophet just across the board on 4 heroes had the top rating, which is definitely something we'll bring up, hero-wise specifically, here in just a bit. And Birdring ends up moving over to Hanzo in this instance. So EQO goes on the flank side and ends up finding Bedosian, but he ends up getting caught with a self-destruct. Gesture ends up finding Carpe, and then this is where the things start to finally turn for the Spitfire. Neptuno ends up walking directly into a Dragon Strike, and then Gesture finds the follow-up. He gets 2 more eliminations, gets a D-Mech onto Hotba, and then EQO is the equalizer in this case, because he comes in with the Dragon Strike, which ends up splitting up the Spitfire. Fury gets D-Mech'd, which didn't really happen all that often in the series, because Fury does what Fury does and just rarely dies. We'll talk about his ridiculous stat line later on. But the Fusion got the cleanup that they needed to close out and, secure the win on the first map. So it was a pretty good start overall, but, being able to hold on for 4.5 minutes on the last point is not something we get to see every day, but it seems like a lot of teams struggle to complete Dorado in particular, because, the same thing happened to NYXL.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, overall for this first map, the teams are actually fairly even across the board for stats. Sato was definitely the head, basically ahead in the main tank battle at this point in terms of stats. Whereas Fury was Fury, and he was basically nuts. He had only posted 4 deaths that whole map. He had 14 eliminations. For the first map, he was 17% of the first kills in team fights. Basically, he secured the first kill for his team 17% of the time. And just to give you an idea how crazy that is for an off tank, Birdring, who primarily played Widowmaker, which is notorious for the first kills in team fights, only nabbed 19% of the first kills. So for him to do that on Diva is insane. But this map was dictated by the tanks, like 100% by the tanks. All the DPS basically came together to post an average of a -1 kill death ratio. So they were dying just as much as they were killing, pretty much. So a lot of it fell on the tanks, and you can kind of see that at least at this point, the tank matchup looks fairly even. And as soon as that changes, the whole dynamic of the match changes. And we actually start to see that in the second map, which is Oasis.
All right, so opening up on round 1, we saw Pharahs coming out from both sides on University. So we had EQO for the Fusion, and it was Prophet playing Pharah for the Spitfire. And the Spitfire end up getting the positional advantage on the point. And basically, they just take the first capture without too much contention there. But the problem with the Fusion lineup is, at least with the lineup that they came out with, they really don't have a whole lot of shield burst potential. So it's going to be, it's already problematic trying to get a point back on control with Pharah. But not being able to win the shield wars is definitely going to plague them in this. So Sato ends up being the first to fall, and Gesture ends up diving onto the Fusion support line, ends up killing both Boombox and Neptuno, and the Fusion are just struggling to get past the Orisa shield in this one. Hot Puff finally comes in big with just some cleanup. He ends up finding Fury and Bedosian, and at that time, the Fusion had 5 ultimates. They didn't actually have to invest any of those ultimates to secure that fight inflict point, which was an absolutely big deal. But at that point, Spitfire already had the control percentage at 99%, so it's one fight territory at this point. So what does London do? They adjust their lineup, so the tanks move to dive tanks, so they bring out the Winston, they bring out the Diva. We see Bedosian getting knocked down by an Earthshatter, and the Fusion start to get aggressive off of this, but the problem is they get a little bit too aggro. We always joke about how fraggy you go. You don't want to go too fraggy, because things don't always work out so well when you do that. And Fury uses that mobility on the Diva. He shuts down EQO, ends up eating a Graviton Surge, and the Spitfire are able to flip the point off of that to take the first round. So all in all, Fury just doing what Fury does. He's just pulling everything into the void with the defense matrices. And then in round 2, we see Spitfire coming out with a triple support line. So we had Bird Rain, who is the solo DPS on the team. He's playing the Widowmaker in this case. Carpe ends up finding him early, which allows Fusion to take the initial capture. So one of the first times they actually get a first control in this series. So EQO ends up eating a ton of damage on the Pharah, and what does Fury do? He just gets aggressive. He gets right in his face, shoots him out of the sky, just really bullying EQO in this series, regardless of what hero he was on. Bedosian ends up sniping Carpe from long range, which ends up forcing the Fusion to regroup. So you have Hotbug coming in with a self-destruct, which, comes in pretty big. He ends up catching both Nuss and Gesture, so 2 very key picks there. And London end up forcing a Transcendence out of Boombox in what was already a lost fight at that point. And this is where the respawns start to come in for the Spitfire, and they just end up chasing the Fusion down at this point. It was a lost fight for the Spitfire, and they were able to get the kills that they needed, and, it's just time and time again. We see the skill ceiling and just the individual play from the Spitfire really just take control of the series, and they did just that on statistically was one of their worst maps just throughout the entire season, because Oasis, for the longest time, was the bane of the Spitfire's existence. But come playoff time, they really turned it around, and a lot of that comes in a preparation that they did.
Yeah, one of the big things that I want to point out before we start really digging into this map is they didn't run any crazy comps this time. They basically ran, pretty standard compositions. We didn't get to see the crazy Reaper comp or anything like that. They basically just let their tanks run wild. And the key to really their success on Oasis, at least this time around, was they just didn't die. In general, their team was very good at getting in and getting out of fights and staying alive. Prophet and Birdring only died 3 times together across this whole map, whereas Ikyo and Carpe died 11 times together. And just to give you an idea how much they bullied Ikyo, I'm really glad you mentioned that. He averaged about 7 deaths per 10 minutes on Pharah, whereas Prophet 2.6 on Pharah. So you can see just how much they were bullying the DPS. But it wasn't just the DPS for London that was doing work. I had mentioned the tank battle is going to be a consistent thing we're going to talk about, and the tanks averaged 11 kills per 10 minutes across all of their heroes for Oasis, which for tank players is substantial because usually tank players are just there to harass and make space and die on the point eventually. Like that's how Oasis goes. Oasis and Ilios are both notorious maps for fights lasting forever. So your tanks, their primary job is to just stick around as long as possible and then die and then come back and do it all over again. Well, Fury and Jester weren't doing that. They were like, no, we're gonna stick around a long time because the rest of the team, like the rest of the Fusion, are gonna be dead. And that's how it went down. I mean, this was I'd like to break it down more, but this was actually pretty cut and dry, clean Overwatch. There were a few counter picks here and there, but overall, on every level, London just beat the Fusion on this map.
Right, which brought us to map 3, which was played on Eichenwald. And, Fusion, again, were up first on the attack. So they end up coming out with triple DPS, and, Hotba, kind of being the flex player on this team, ends up bringing out the Tracer. So what we saw early on was Sato's barrier was just getting destroyed as soon as it was placed. So it's definitely going to be a hard take for the Fusion attack. So Birdring opened things up, and he ends up sniping EQO. So Spitfire look to take advantage. They take Carpe out of the fight early when Neptuno is going in for the res on EQO. So, they got the res off, but they still got punished for it by taking out Carpe. Poco ends up coming in pretty big. He ends up eating a Dragon Strike. And this is where Hotba kind of comes into play. He takes down and focuses Gesture. And Fusion are able to take control of the payload after EQO comes in with a 3K. So this is where we saw the adjustments coming out from the Spitfire. Their defense brings out triple support. So Bedosian is just focusing on Hotba at this point. So we got the flex player duel going on between these two, which was one of the key things that we were going to be looking at in regards to performances, just because Hotba at the time had the best Tracer stats in the playoffs, and Bedosian just wins it outright, which forces Hotba to switch over to the Zenyatta. We saw Birdring get a pretty stylish play over on Carpe? Yeah, because it's a flank shot, and EQO continues to just struggle to find angles. He was on the fair at the time, so really not a whole lot of sight lines available for him. But, this is where Poco across the board, his Poco bombs were what you would expect from Poco. Some were definitely flashier than others, but for the most part, the Poco bomb came into play in a lot of situations throughout this series, but the Fusion didn't always capitalize on those opportunities, which we'll definitely be talking about quite a bit. But in this case, in this one, he ends up finding 2, but the Spitfire tank line ends up being the equalizer in this fight. Carpe ends up dropping Birdring, and then Poco again finds another self-destruct, ends up taking down Nuss out of the fight. So, losing your Mercy player, never a good thing. But the opportunity to capitalize kind of slips through the Fusion's fingertips, because EQO ends up falling to a Winston bubble when he went for a barrage, and that was really the turning point here for the Spitfire. So in this case, Gesture just gets aggressive with the Primal Rage, and Sato is really just the last man standing on the payload. He's definitely lacking the support. Neptuno comes back in only to get whip shot by Prophet's Brigitte, and ends up finding 2 more kills with the follow-up, and then we just see the Spitfire clean house, and the Fusion end up getting stopped about halfway through the second phase. So not the best showing on the tech for the Fusion. And then on the other side, Fusion start off great. They take Gesture out of the fight early. They end up pulling Bedosian in. EQO ends up finding Birdring with 2 direct rockets, and then The Fusion get aggressive after they take out Gesture, so pretty good early start. So Spitfire are struggling. They have about like 130 left on their attack on the first point. And then we get like this very chaotic sequence where, we have eliminations coming out on both sides. They're like trading back and forth. But again, like it's the Spitfire tank line that gets the better of the exchange. And it's just time and time again, the tank line comes into play for the Spitfire. Whether it was them just surviving or them actually getting the kills, which happened quite a bit in this series, more so with Fury, as opposed to all the other tanks in the playoffs, or even in this match in particular. So they end up securing the payload, and this is when we see the changes come out again. So obviously going into that second phase, there's a lot more verticality. The Spitfire end up going towards a dive comp, with the Fusion looking to play more close quarters. So Prophet is on Genji at this point. He ends up getting a ton of dash resets, and he just cuts straight through Sato. Badosian ends up forcing Carpe back. We see him, trying to pressure Carpe with the Tracer, which he does. Like, he gets right in Carpe's face. He tries to, Kobe him with the Pulse Bomb. Doesn't quite work. We see Carpe, like, grapple out. But Badosian gets right in his face, ends up taking Carpe out of the fight. And Prophet removes EQO, and Neptuno is the next one to fall, and then we just see the Spitfire close it out. But, like, man, I love seeing Badosian on the Tracer, just, like, being like, you know what, Carpe? You're not even going to be a factor. Like, let's just take you out of the equation. And then the cleanup on the ground is all there for the Spitfire.
I mean, that basically points to London's key success in the grand finals is one player on the team is going to be in charge of Carpe, and that's all you do. You harass him, you kill him, you keep him out of the fight in almost any way possible. And, we got to see it on London's defense. Birdring was finding any way possible to kill Carpe. Like, he would pop around walls, he would wall climb around and shoot him, like, right next to him as Hanzo. Like, just anywhere Birdring could get a shot on him, he would take out Carpe. And then you mentioned Badosian on the Tracer did the same thing. But really, like you talked about the tanks, and this was actually the Fusion's best showing on the off tank, and it was Poco. And it wasn't just the Poco bombs. Poco actually secured a lot of kills and actually went, pretty much blow for blow, stat for stat with Fury on this map. And considering how badly the rest of his team was doing, that's actually pretty impressive. The problem was, like I said, the rest of the Fusion did pretty poorly, whereas the rest of London did really well. Prophet only died 3 times the whole match. So again, London seems to prioritize just keeping their players around to cause chaos, to do what they can. And that's basically what he did. Between him and Birdring, they kept EQO and Carpe on their toes. They didn't really ever get a chance to get set up. And that led to a lot of confusion in the Fusion. And Sato died an average of, well, basically he averaged 8 deaths per 10 minutes, which is bad for the main tank. Like, the main tank needs to stick around. Like I mentioned earlier, the main tank's job is to stick around as long as possible to create space. Gesture, on the other hand, died an average of 6 times per 10 minutes. So you can see Gesture was there a lot more than Sato was. And that just, that snowballed into the other factors. And, we haven't really talked about the supports a whole lot, but Neptuno was punished heavily this map for his aggression. He was punished in multiple ways for going for pretty ballsy reses, bad positioning. He averaged 3 more deaths per 10 minutes than Nuss, which is huge on a Mercy. Like, I kind of touched on tanks being around, but your Mercy being around is actually more important, especially with the res and stuff like that. So all around, Neptuno's stats were horrible this map just because he was dead most of the time.
Right.
So I mean, all in all, this was like textbook London aggression. They held any corner they could and just made Philly fight for every inch. So as soon as Philly lost one fight, that was like a minute gone that they'd have to just reset. and they just fell further and further behind. And then when London got on the offense, they weren't real pressured, so they just took their time and slowly whittled them down, and played the long game and eventually won it with plenty of time to spare.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the like some of the positioning with the supports, because like one of the things that I talked about last week was with Nuss and his survivability. A lot of that was just due to the fact that he's really not dying to the double snipers in most instances, and that pretty much reigned true in this series as well. He did struggle a little bit with the D.Va self-destructs though, because sometimes he was just kind of like backed into a corridor and just didn't have anywhere to move. But he didn't really fall to EQO or Carpe throughout the majority of this series, which was nice to see. So moving on, we went on to Map 4, which was on Full Sky Industries, and this one was one for the ages. This map was hype. Like, we saw so much going on. So the Fusion were on the attack first. What do? They come out with 303. They got the triple tank. They got triple support. So what are they going to do? They're going to look to bully the random point. They go up the high ground on the right-hand side, and then they go underneath into that large health pack room. So they just go straight to the point. The Spitfire snipers end up coming alive. They end up getting the D-Mech onto Poco. And the Fusion frontline just drops at this point. So Prophet has his Dragon Strike available for the next fight. And he ends up finding 3 after Gesture halts them into the Dragon. So Fusion end up rallying up for the next engage. But their Earthshatter just doesn't find the value that they need, but Poco is there to answer with a Poco Bomb. He gets 3k, they did the Graviton Surge, Self-Destruct combo. The Wombo combo always comes in big. Not a huge place for Poco whenever he was in. So Fusion end up securing the first point with 5 minutes left on the clock. So we see some swaps coming out from the Spitfire. Bedosian ends up bringing out the Ana for second point defense. We see Birdreen switch over to Farah. So, Bedosian looking to get those nano or those bio grenades, onto the tanks, looking to get the debuff so they don't have the healing that they need. Also, trying to reduce the effect of the coalescence, and just the amount of ultimate charge being brought by, the 303 comp. And we see Sato come in with the Earth Shatter, but again, like, the shatters from the Fusion just did not look that good. Sometimes they would only get, like, one person knocked down. Sometimes it would just be blocked altogether, or just stopped by another ultimate, for that matter, in some cases. And Sato ends up dropping to a self-destruct, and the Spitfire end up holding the Fusion to 1 tick on that engage. We see some stall tactics having to come out from the Spitfire. We got to see some Mei coming into play, which was pretty cool. The Blizzard is there on the point. The Fusion are kept in place. And Mei ends up getting like a 3k, which, we don't get to see all that often. So, I'm always happy to see Mei, any chance that we get. Volskaya is one of the few times when we actually get to see it. So Ichibo, he is on the Zarya in the 303 comp. He looks to, get everyone in place with the Graviton Surge. But again, Fury is there with the mindset, the mind's eye with the defense matrix again. So just playing spoiler to EQO, no matter what EQO was playing. The Spitfire end up diving Neptuno. They take him out of the fight, and this is where they just go all in. They turn up that aggression. Prophet ends up finding the Genji dash resets to get the cleanup. And we're just heading into overtime. Sato ends up throwing himself on the point. Eliminations go all in the favor of the Spitfire, and they hold onto the point, just off their aggression. Like, so many times, like, they were just pushing forward. They were getting the late kills. And the Fusion just didn't really have a window open to really get a clean engage late into that attack. So looking at the Spitfire side of things, the Spitfire end up going dive with their attack. Bedosian is running Ana, looking to Bionade the triple tank defense of the Fusion. So, we don't really see Ana a whole lot in this case. And, there was a questionable thing with a Nano Blade, which we definitely have to talk about. Sato ends up being the first one to fall, but Carpe finds a pretty big headshot onto Nuss. So, taking out the Mercy. This was one of the few times that Nuss was the first one to fall for the Spitfire. We see Ikuo coming in with the Storm Arrows, which really helps pressure Gesture down. And this is where the Nano Blade comes in. So Prophet gets the Nano Boost, and he's trying to cut through the tank line with the blade. Good luck. That's just way too many, Swains to try to take out an Orisa or a Diva, whatever. It does not work. So, priority-wise, wasn't the best thing to do in that situation. So, yeah, needless to say, that did not happen. Then we see Neptuno fly in, just going full Neptuno here. He finds 2 eliminations with the pistol. And, later on in the series, he didn't get more kills than another support, which we'll talk about. Bedosian ends up getting staggered pretty bad here, and the Spitfire are starting to run out of time. There's 30 seconds left on the clock on their attack. Carpe ends up finding Prophet with a headshot, but Neptuno ends up falling to a self-destruct. They end up demeching Poco, and this is where the Spitfire tank line starts to find the eliminations for them. They end up having a numbers advantage on a point, and then secure point A in overtime. So this is where things get really interesting. So there's a sequence here where Birdring snipes Neptuno, so the Mercy is out of the fight. Diffusion end up getting split up by a Dragon Strike, and then we see a Poco Bomb come in, finding mass value, and then Prophet on the Hanzo just does Prophet things.
Murders everyone.
He kills everyone as the lone sniper on the point. I can't remember how many kills he got, but there was at least 4 unanswered kills just from Prophet, and they get 1% away from securing a win. But Prophet ends up getting forced back by the respawns. But it was so close. If he would have won it in that moment, that would have been it. Absolutely. That would have been one of the clutchest plays that we have seen, or just one-man shows that we've ever seen. But he didn't close it out there. But spoilers, he did close it out later on. So the Fusion end up, forcing them back with the respawns. And a lot of that was with the help of the barrage. And the Spitfire at this point are down to 1 minute. So what did the Spitfire do? We see some adjustments coming out. We see Prophet switch over. No, it was Birdring who swapped over to the McCree. And Prophet ends up finding Neptuno early. And he gets a 5k! What? So back-to-back, sequences. Prophet is just the one-man show, it just seemed no matter what the Fusion were doing, Prophet was just yeah, that's not happening. Just taking matters into his own hands. And man, talk about an MVP-like performance. Just, let alone one time, but to do it in back-to-back plays like that and just take command, you just don't see that in Overwatch. Let alone happen twice in one map. I was just baffled. That was one of the coolest things that we saw on that map in particular, and really throughout the series. Prophet coming alive and securing the map, and, eventually the game, as they took game 1, 3 maps to 1.
Before I gush about Prophet and his amazing performance this map, I do want to point out EQO did very well this map. He was the only one on his team with a positive kill-death ratio. He did very well both Hanzo and Zarya, despite having some crabs eating. He actually did very well. He was trying his hardest to be the Prophet that his team needed. Unfortunately, London had the actual Prophet, and he just outdid everybody on every hero. So he posted a 10 kills per 10-minute average on Hanzo. We already talked about how he almost took point B by himself, which he eventually pretty much did on Tracer. But I want to kind of take a step back and talk about Prophet on their defense when he switched to Mei. So Mei is typically seen as the stall character. Very rarely is she seen as a viable defensive character outside of a few key points, which Volskaya B can be that, but primarily it's Hanamura point A. And even that strategy we haven't seen a whole lot recently. But he was on Mei for about 2 minutes of the match. And just to give you an idea how well he did on Mei, he was responsible for 50% of his team kills when he was on Mei. He was also responsible for 50% of the first kills in a fight on Mei. And he was on average tracking to end up at 26 kills per 10 minutes. I mean, that would never happen, but
Right.
the fact that he was doing that was insane. He also generated his Blizzard in about a minute, which is really good for Mei. And then he switched to Genji and just did the same amount of craziness on Genji. So he had 5 minutes on Genji. He was tracking to generate 8 ultimates per 10 minutes. I don't know how many AKM blades that is, but I'm sure it's a lot. Uh, and he was averaging a kill a minute, so like he was right there on Genji, better than pretty much. I'd say he was in top 25% of all stats on Genji. But then we'll hop back to the big play where he was on Tracer, and he just systematically deleted the fusion one by one. He saw Carpe was on him. He saw Neptuno was weak, so he just blinked across, killed Neptuno, recalled, one clipped Carpe, and then just slowly went down and killed the rest of them. The only one he didn't kill was EQO, and that's because his tanks had already killed EQO. I can't help but to think that had his tanks just stopped, Prophet would have just killed EQO too.
Mhm.
It was insane. Like the best moment for me in that whole series is he blinks, he kills Neptuno, he comes back, kills Carpe, and then he starts killing the Roadhog, and then he just casually tosses a pulse bomb, and then just continues his murder spree as people behind him die. This was the highlight for the grand finals. It is the most
Mhm.
viewed clip that's an actual play from the Overwatch League. That's not making fun of DJ Khaled. Um, so all in all, this was a phenomenal set for Prophet, and I I will talk about Prophet a lot more as we go into the second set. But this was the Prophet moment. Like this is, I think,
Mhm.
what won him MVP, which we will definitely talk about later. But overall, for the series, the first series, it could just be the best way I can summarize it is London's aggression won them the map, and Carpe's silence basically speaks to that aggression. So London kept up the pressure that they needed to keep Carpe out of the match, and they just positioned themselves in a way that if they ever got punished for their aggression, it didn't matter because the Fusion couldn't capitalize on it.
Right, and it got to the point where, like, at the end of that first game, only 2 Fusion players actually finished with a positive kill to death, and that was Boombox, who had +1, and Hotba had a +3. So, we talk a lot about the pressure that was on Carpe, and when you look at the deaths of the DPS duos for the Fusion with EQO and Carpe, they combined for 79 deaths compared to the Spitfire counterparts. So you would Prophet and Bertrand, who had died 49 times. So, it's a 30 differential. That's pretty significant. But Prophet, man, posting 48 and 16 kill to death with a +32 differential. And, Fury, very respectable line as well, going 41 and 15 with a +26. So just all in all, like, Fury, like, every time I watch Fury play, like, I continue to be amazed at the level that we see from him. And just when you think you've seen it all from him, he turns in an even better performance. So, like, without question, after the performance that we saw from Fury this postseason, he's the top off tank in the league. Like, it's hard to argue for anyone else after seeing everything that he's been able to do.
I could argue that Seagull's pretty good too, but he was the best off tank in the playoffs by far,
Right.
um, and he has the best team that plays around him. So I would probably give it to him in the end, but I could make an argument for Seagull on Diva specifically. Now, if you start throwing in like Zarya and stuff, then it becomes a clear, Fury win.
All right, well, let's move on to game 2, which ended up being a 3-0 win in favor of the Spitfire. So we opened up on Junkertown. Okay, so even like before we started, I was like, okay, Carpe was silenced. This is a perfect opportunity for Carpe to get his feet underneath him, because Junkertown is Widowhaven. You know, if Carpe doesn't come out looking good on this one, you know, that's pretty much it for the Fusion at this point. So Fusion, they were on the attack first, and they end up coming out running the pirate ship. But the problem is, Sato's beers are getting bursted down very quickly. But luckily, he ends up taking out Bedosian early, which forces the Resurrect from Nuss. But as soon as Bedosian is brought back up, he retaliates, he hooks Sato back in, and they end up taking Sato out of the fight. And this is where Prophet's Dragon Strike ends up cutting through the payload, which finds Boombox, who, on this map, was on the Bastion. But they bring Boombox back into the fight, and EQO just comes in and gets a 3k, and that came off of the back of a very clutch Resurrect from Neptuno. Nothing out of the ordinary from him there. It ends up securing the fight, and then the Fusion pushed the payload to that first objective there. Bedosian ends up getting clipped by a Pokebomb, so the Fusion are continuing to push forward with the momentum that they have, but Fury answers back with a self-destruct of his own, ends up getting both Neptuno and Boombox, and this is where Boombox ends up switching to the Roadhog, so now they're running triple tank for the Fusion attack. Prophet looks to Dragon Strike the Fusion, but the problem is he gets killed mid-animation by the Dragon Strike from EQO, so a feels bad man moment in that instance, because, you know, it uses the Dragon Strike if you were Prophet in that instance. And Spitfire, their aggression gets punished in this instance, so the Fusion snipers start to come alive here, head into the third phase, and this is where things start to turn here. So Birdbrain ends up starting to win the Widow 1v1 against Carpe. Sato ends up getting chased down by the Spitfire, and then the London snipers just take over. The sniper duel completely flips on the last phase, and Birdbrain ends up catching Neptuno with a headshot, and EQO just gets staggered. Poco ends up getting split off from the rest of his team. He gets staggered very bad, and things are just kind of like unraveling for the Fusion. Carpe ends up getting caught in the backline. Sato has another positional error, which results in another death for him. And it's down to 10 seconds at this point. And Sato just doesn't have the support with him when he dives in, and the overtime, timer just runs out at this point. So Fusion, again, failing to complete a map. So looking at the Spitfire attack, pretty straightforward. Prophet gets dropped early, but they answer right back by hooking in Boombox, taking him out of the fight. They end up finding a pick onto Neptuno, so Mercy's out of the fight, and then things start to unravel from there. Spitfire end up taking the first point. The Fusion end up forcing out an ultimate to kind of like deal with the high ground. And Poco ends up getting like a team kill, basically. He comes up with like a massive Pokebomb, gets a team kill off of that, and he ends up catching both of the Spitfire supports in that corridor, like on the left-hand side if you were the attackers. So
placement.
It was perfect. Like, they had absolutely nowhere to go. So, Nuss struggled a little bit with the self-destructs, but all in all, like, death-wise, he was still, like, one of the better performances, at least in regards to positioning. But, you can definitely stay out of the sniper sight lines, but chances are you can't get out of all the sight lines altogether. And, sometimes it just meant eating a self-destruct from Poco in more instances than not. But the Spitfire end up striking right back with a Dragon Strike, which results in the 3k. So they have 4 minutes left to reach that rectangle of victory. So, again, going into that final phase, the first push is always the toughest to defend against, or to attack through, because of just the door close in, and then you're getting pushed into those very small corridors at that point. The Fusion end up winning that first push. So that gives them a little bit of breathing room for their defense, but it's pretty short-lived. So the Dragon Strike comes in, it ends up splitting up the Fusion defense. It drops Boombox, and then Fury just comes in with the follow-up, finds 2 more eliminations, and the Spitfire are able to complete the map to take map 1.
Yeah, I mean, this map pretty much starts the same way the previous map ended, with Prophet and Birdering just running wild on EQO and Carpe. So just to give you an idea, Carpe and EQO racked up 15 kills together. Birdering and Prophet alone racked up 16 and 17 kills respectively. So they were much more effective than their counterparts. Birdring, specifically on the Widow duel, actually never outright lost the Widow duel. The only time he was killed by Carpe in the Widow duel was typically in the middle or at the end of a fight when they had already lost. So whereas Birdering was also picking off Carpe about 7% of the fights, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a big deal when you think about how Widow duels play out. As you mentioned, Poco played phenomenally this map, bombs and otherwise. He actually did, go toe-to-toe with Fury again. He actually made out better than Fury statistically on some categories, mostly ultimate related. But overall, it was the same old story. It was basically Poco trying to carry his team kicking and streaming to a win when his main tank was diving in and mispositioning and dying very early. Sato averaged a little over a death a minute, while as Gesture, and this is my favorite stat, Gesture died an average of 0.3 deaths per minute. So that's 1 versus 0.3. So you can effectively say Gesture died 70% less than Sato did. That's ridiculous. And that's going to set the tone for the rest of the night. Like, once we get into Li Jiang, you're going to see that stat basically just continue through the night.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, we would move on to Li Jiang Tower for map 2. And round 1 opens up, and Fusion just give up the point for free, basically. Spitfire just muscle their way onto the point like it's just nothing, and Fusion just don't contest for whatever reason. And, of course, this is going to be problematic because the Fusion are running the Pharah on control and, taking back the point with the Pharah. Definitely some issues there. So Gesture ends up diving the backline, and, this is one of the few times where he doesn't walk away with the kill. But Prophet comes in over the top with a barrage, and the Spitfire end up holding strong as Gesture is zoning out both Carpe and Neptuno. That was awesome. Like, he didn't walk away with the kills, but, just taking him out of the fight, giving the Spitfire the man advantage is absolutely massive. Sato ends up, again, position-wise, he just gets caught out, and that ends up putting the Spitfire in one-fight territory. And this first round went really quick, just with the lack of contention being put on from the Fusion. So Carpe tries to, be sneaky. It tries to backcap, which pulls Prophet back to contest. So that didn't work out for the Fusion, and the Fusion just don't get to the point, and it's a 100-0 round in favor of the Spitfire into round 1, which sends us to Guardians for round 2, and the Fusion come out opting to run the Widowmaker and Pharah DPS duo, and Birdring just opens up with a 3k right off the bat. The Spitfire start to build that early control. Sato ends up getting separated from his team. He's the first one to fall, and Birdring just continues to find the shots as he is not getting pressured at all on the Widowmaker. So Prophet ends up finding Carpe again, but he ends up eating a headshot from Boombox, who is on the Zenyatta. And Gesture, again, no surprise, this was where he was a lot of the time. He was at the spawn door. Just trying to keep Carpe out of the fight, just not letting him contest at all. Carpe does eventually escape and finds an angle with the Widowmaker, and, he comes up pretty big here. He ends up getting a 2k which turns the fight in favor of the Fusion, who flipped the point at 99%. That didn't last long because Prophet ends up sticking Carpe with a Pulse Bomb. Birdring finds back-to-back headshots, which results in, 2 more eliminations. Spitfire end up retaking control, and Neptuno gets stuck with a Pulse Bomb, and Sato is just gunned down by Fury, and that was all she wrote. So, we saw a little bit of life from Carpe, but man, did he have to work for it. Like, so much time. Gesture was just there, just batting him away, or just tickling him with the Tesla cannon. He's not able to really, grapple away, because anywhere that Carpe was, Gesture was soon to follow.
Exactly. I mean, this is the point where London kind of solidified that they were going to run away with it. They posted 28 kills versus the Fusion's 12 across this map. And it wasn't just Carpe that was getting punished. EQO was heavily punished this map, mostly because he was without Carpe backing him up. He was in spawn for 15 seconds out of every minute, whereas the person killing him, Birdring, was only in spawn for about 6 seconds every minute. So that's a lot of lost DPS time. And just to give you an idea, if you want to compare Pharah to Pharah, Prophet never died on Pharah, whereas EQO was dead a lot on Pharah. So London just bullied them. I mean, they would take them out one by one or remove them from a fight one by one, and then just let Birdring knock them down. That's all it basically came down to. I wouldn't point to any huge misplays from the Fusion on this one. There was just nothing they could do. Just London straight up outplayed them. So, some of the previous maps I could say, well, they positioned wrong. And there were times when Sato was caught out on this map, but that was more so because London was playing the way they were more on Sato. Whereas the next map, King's Row, I could definitely say Sato made a lot of positioning mistakes.
Absolutely. So, moving on to map 3, it was on King's Row. So, London looking to close it out on the England map. Not rigged at all. So, Fusion were on the attack first, and Boombox ends up getting hooked in and taken out of the fight from a Birdring headshot. But, we do see some retaliation because Bedosian gets hooked in. But luckily, Prophet comes in with a Riptire, which results in an elimination. It also gets a DMEC. And the Fusion at this point are looking to just ease their way onto the point. And EQO shoots the Dragon Strike, which basically keeps the Spitfire up against the wall. So they're not really able to move because they're cornered where they are at this point. And the closer respawns end up giving Fusion the man advantage, which allows them to secure that first objective and get the payload. So Gesture ends up finding in Obidin to dive on top of Neptuno, Mario stomping him, takes him out of the fight, but the Fusion do manage to retaliate. Carpe ends up falling here, and Neptuno isn't in a position to get the Resurrect off. And this is where it kind of gets interesting, because you have Bedosian, who is on the Zenyatta on this map, and, he's on the flank side for a long time, not getting punished at all for it. And it gets to the point where he enters a 1v1 against Carpe. So it's Zenyatta versus Widow. And I love to see this. Bedosian just comes in, just gives 0 Fs, and it just gets right in Carpe's face. And, they're trading pretty evenly. And eventually, Bedosian's like, you know what?
I'm out.
It was pretty close.
My job is done.
I don't know who would have won the 1v1, but, it was enough of a distraction to keep Carpe out of the fight, which was the whole point. But, there are so many instances where if something like this happens, it has to get punished. And the Fusion just were not able to capitalize on the flank routes that the Spitfire were taking, at least in the second series. They did manage to catch, Birdring out on the flanks more in the first series. Didn't really happen in this second set. So after this 1v1 happens, Carpe ends up finding Prophet's Riptire. And off of that, this is where the payload really starts to move for the Fusion. Gesture. Hold on. I lost my track. So Spitfire end up trying to turn up the aggression here. And they end up winning the fight. But they have to invest heavily in it. They end up using 3 ultimates in the fight to stop the Fusion's progress here. And EQO comes back in with a Dragon Strike, but that's met with a Transcendence, so, that's keeping the Spitfire up at this point. But the Spitfire support ults come up pretty early, and the Fusion actually prolong the fight enough to, withstand the damage being put out, and they end up securing the second point when they win that fight. So they just outlasted the Spitfire because, they maybe jumped the gun a little bit too early with the support ults in that instance. So now it's a Fusion that are being the aggressors in this series, and Nuss is the first one to fall in this fight. Fury ends up coming in with a pretty big self-destruct, which ends up finding 2. And we're at like 20 seconds left on the clock at this point, so EQO ends up opening things up by taking down Prophet, and this brings out Carpe, who comes out ahead in the Widow 1v1, and the Spitfire respawns are trickling in at this point, and Fusion end up finishing the map in overtime. So, if we go into Time Bank, they're not going to get any time, which does come into play because Spitfire do complete their attack. So on the Spitfire side of this, Poco ends up finding Prophet on the flank, and Gesture ends up falling, which forces the Spitfire to reset. Badosian gets chased down, he was behind enemy lines, and Carpe ends up threading the needle, through, I can't remember what building it is, but it's like through the sign when you're looking at the spawn of the attackers, which was just, it was amazing. He headshots Birdring, takes him out of the fight, and the Spitfire look for like a cheeky Dragon Strike behind the Fusion, but EQO pushes forward and ends up dropping the Spitfire frontline with the Storm Arrows. So Spitfire, they look to adjust here. So they end up going to the 303, so they're coming out triple tank, triple support. And Sato ends up being the first to fall for the Fusion. And the Spitfire, just with a man advantage, they just bully their way onto the point. And they get a late stagger onto Carpe, which secures the first point for the Spitfire. And then what does Carpe do, right? He switches to the Doomfist. And man, this was awesome. Like, we don't get to see a ton of Doomfist play, so anytime we get to see Doomfist, we get really hyped. And he just styles on the Spitfire. He ends up getting the 3K. Yeah, initially. So the Graviton Surge comes in from Birdring, and the Fusion they drop. Just clean execution. And later on, as, the payload is pushed further, the Fusion look to Graviton Surge the Spitfire, and, they don't really get the value out of it, and then, sure enough, Gesture comes in on the flank side, drops the Earthshatter, and that just shuts down the Fusion. They get run over again, heading into the last phase. And this is where the Spitfire, they push ahead. Gesture waiting at the spawn door like he usually is, and the Fusion charge in, only for Sato to drop first. EQO ends up getting demeched, and the Spitfire just brawl it out and complete the map with 110 left in their time bank, which means they're the only ones that are gonna have a time bank round. So they need one tick to win the grand finals with 110 left, for their attack. So what do? Really no surprise. They come out running triple tank, triple support. We see a slight variation to the merry-go-round strat. So Birdring is waiting in spawn, looking for, that cue to switch to Widowmaker. I wouldn't say, he definitely did not have better sightlines compared to the Bamboozle play. But the Spitfire, they bully their way onto the point. Sato is the first one to fall again, so without their main tank, Neptuno is in no position to get a res off, and really at that point, it's just easy pickings for the Spitfire. But man, I thought it was very cheeky that, we saw at least a slight variations to the merry-go-round to kind of close things out to secure the grand finals for the Spitfire. But either way, with that little time, you knew what was coming out, and still, the Fusion did not have an answer for it. So, all in all, man, just, I love seeing the flank shatter really set things up, but just the amount of pressure from the Spitfire tank line, it just sent, it felt like more times than not, the Fusion were just reeling just from that alone.
Yeah, but, I mean, this is actually the best map for the night for the Fusion because Carpe actually woke up for most of this map. This was the only time he posted a positive kill death ratio. Some of that was related to Doomfist and his 4 kills right off the bat. But overall, he did much better on Widow. He had a little more freedom to run. The problem was it just wasn't enough. Like London was already firing on all cylinders, and you know I talked a lot last week about counter picks, and that's basically how London won this map so easily. Is they would play into the fusion, they would see what would work, and then they would make a key pick, and then regardless of what time was left, they would just come through and steamroll them, and then they would just do it all over again. That's how they got point A. That's how they got point B. Point C, they actually just carried their momentum from point B and didn't let Philly make the key picks. So, I mean, you see it time and time again. Like, if they're getting pressured by flankers, then they would switch to Brig. If the Fusion would switch to a ground offense, they would go to a Pharah. It was just crazy all around. And something we haven't even talked about is Prophet was amazing this map, and he was playing Junkrat. And Junkrat isn't very popular in this meta. He's still pretty popular in King's Row, just like Zarya, but he was top in every category for Junkrat. He was landing rip tires where he needed to. For all his stats, he was top 25% in the league for the season, not just for the playoffs. So all in all, it just kind of proved that Prophet can play any DPS that they need him to play at such a high level. And there were multiple times that Prophet was the key to stalling out the Fusion's offense or getting a key pick and slowing them down or breaking through them. And that was the story of the finals. It was basically the Prophet show featuring Gesture and Fury making room for him. And this kind of showed us the London team that we've been waiting for. London has always been categorized for their aggressiveness. They just didn't quite know how to use it. And while Philly has always been known as an aggressive team, the second day really forced Philly to play a style that they don't typically play, which is the slower, the more methodical pace where they have to control the tempo of the game. Because when they went all in all out aggression, they lost because London was just better at that play style. And I'm really happy that we finally got to see this London, because this is what we've been waiting for all season. We saw shades of it in stage 1, and then they just kind of, pittered their way into the playoffs, and here they are. They're the best team in the league, and they actually deserve it. I feel like they were the best team consistently throughout the season, despite where they were. They picked it up where they needed to. They made the cuts, and it shows that they had the talent that you need to win the grand finals.
Yeah, so looking at that second set, Fury was an absolute madman. He led the lobby in eliminations with 81. Prophet wasn't that far behind him. He finished with 79. And the only Spitfire player to post less eliminations than the Fusion in this series was Nuss. Like, that's... Oh, man. But, man, when you talk about their survivalist instinct of Fury, that was in full display. Because in these 3 maps, in the second set, he only died 6 times. Nuss, he fared very well as well. He only died 9 times. And, we talk about, the flex support for, we have Badosian and, Boombox. And they both finished second in damage on their respective teams. Badosian ended up finishing with 47,000 damage. Boombox had 42,000 damage. But, Badosian fared better when it came to eliminations. He even beat out Birdreen by plus 10 in that category. And Prophet, the MVP, led the way in the lobby in regards to damage with 58.7k. Ichigo was the second highest, who was trailing him by 6,000. And this was, one of the only instances where Neptuno, who is by far the most bloodthirsty Mercy in the league, actually got out-damaged by Nuss. So not something you get to see every day. So I was shocked to see that. But Prophet, In Game 2, he earned 6.6 ultimates per 10 minutes, which was more than a full ult more than any other player in any playoff match this season. He had 4 heroes with more than 20 minutes of playtime, which was, more than any other player as well. So, like, when you look at Prophet, like, he did win MVP. Like, he posted the highest play rating on Hanzo, on Brigitte, on Pharah, on Junkrat. When you talk about his team kills, in 5 of the 6 playoff games, Prophet recorded at least 25%. Like, what the heck is going on? Like, he turned it up. And, this is a player that, through some of the struggles in Stage 3 and Stage 4, where the Spitfire went 9-11, and to sidetrack for a minute, like, London was the only team that made the playoffs that had a losing record in Stage 3 and Stage 4 collectively. But, since those first 3 map losses to the Gladiators, they finished the last 21 maps with an 18-2-1 record. But, Carpe, we knew that he needed to step up, but in this series, he posted 2 of, his worst kill-death ratios in the Grand Finals, and his play rating in Match 1 was 689, which was his worst of any match this season. So, all across the board, man, like, Prophet, we knew his flexibility, but there were times where London was still trying to figure out who they were as a team kind of late in the season, and for him to just, yes, we already knew his Brigitte was the best, one of the best in the league after Stage 4, but to see that versatility and flexibility come out in that effect when it mattered most, especially on the heroes that we don't really get to see him on, because, on Pharah, going in, everyone pegged EQO as the best Pharah between the two, and that definitely was not the case in performance, so I was just happy to see Prophet styling on every hero that he played. That was great to see.
Yeah, I mean, it shows. I mean, he picked up MVP for a reason. When we're talking about the MVP discussion, we can make a case for Fury. He made the plays he needed to. He ate the grabs he needed to. He was there the whole time. I mean, he almost never died. He was key in denying Neptuno key resurrects and punishing the over-aggression from both Neptuno and Sato. He only posted 20 deaths over both game sets, which is insane when you consider that 15 of them came the first night.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I can make a case for Fury, but I think it has to go to Prophet, because Prophet posted very high statistical numbers, but he also had that X factor. He had that star power. He made that Hanzo play. He made that Tracer play. He made those Brigitte plays across the night. And, when you compare, counterpart to counterpart, Fury and Poco actually played pretty similarly on a pretty similar level. Fury obviously was a little better, but you could kind of whittle that down to the rest of his team helping him out there. Whereas if you look at Prophet versus his counterpart EQO, it's not even a conversation. Like, Prophet was better than EQO in every regard. And if you watch the interview, like the All Access interview, EQO basically says the same thing. He's like, I just got beat. Like, he obviously says a lot more than that, because EQO, I think, really likes to talk. He might be the next Jake, but he basically says, like, I got beat. And there is no person on any of these two teams that contributed more than Prophet. So, he posted the plus 53 kill death ratio for the grand finals. He, like you said, he accumulated 25% of his team kills. The 9.4 kills per 10 minutes is insane across all of his characters, especially when you consider that the next closest to him was Birdering with 7.6. So he had 2 more kills per minute, like per 10 minutes, than Birdering did. He also posted, the fastest ult charge time. Just when you look at Prophet statistically, he was pretty much across the board the best player on his team. But more than that, he was just fun to watch, and he came in clutch when they needed him to. So I think that justifies him as MVP above all other reasons.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you just look at the stats. Like, he was first in kills per 10 minutes. He was second in deaths per 10 minute. I think Fury was the one that beat him out in that regard. He had the highest kill to death ratio. As you mentioned, he had the highest ults per 10 minutes. He also had the best K to D, like kills to deaths in that 10-minute span as well. But like, yeah, his Winston's lab rating wasn't as strong as Fury, but like, I don't know if you saw Fury's number, but it was like 1435. I saw that and I was like, really? Like, that was
Winston's lab skews
number.
heavily for flex tanks.
Absolutely. So. I absolutely agree with that. But all in all, like, Prophet, like, yes, the tanks definitely helped set him up. There were a lot of, halts that came in from Gesture, which allowed him to hit those Dragon Strikes. But like, no matter what hero he was on, Prophet was making an impact. So, no matter which way you look at it, like, Prophet had the highlight plays. He was the one that just took matters into his own hands. Heck, at times, he was the one to close out the maps single-handedly against, 4 or 5 people. So, absolutely, Prophet was deserving of the MVP. Like, yes, I would have loved to see it go to Gesture or Fury, but Prophet was the man of the hour in this case. And what can this kid not do at this point? So moving forward, like, the Spitfire, they have the recipe for success. So I'm really curious to see like what sort of additions this team is going to make. It seems like they're going to be sticking to an all-Korean team. So if you want to play for the Spitfire, and let's say you're on like the British Hurricane, you might want to start learning Korean.
Yeah.
Because there's no way they're going to be changing up the formula moving forward after their playoff performance. So,
I did point out that London winning is actually the best case scenario for everybody because it's an American owner for an EU team full of Korean players. So it's like we all won.
Yeah. And most importantly, they played the point. Like, London did what London normally doesn't do. Like,
they forced the Fusion to do it more than they did it, which is phenomenal. I mean, it was a good grand final. I as lopsided as it was, especially the second day, I was entertained the whole way through. I would definitely say the first day was a much tighter race and more competitive. But overall, I was excited the whole way through.
Absolutely. So all in all, like, fantastic grand finals. We know a lot of people actually went. Unfortunately, neither of us made it out. But I know someone had bought you some swag when they were out there. So
he comes back Thursday, so he had to fly across country as soon as the final ended for some family business. So otherwise I would have wore that tonight, but. Yeah, I mean he actually sent me a picture, and he was like 1 row behind Prophet on the plane, and I was like, just reach out and touch him, absorb his power, and carry us to GM. Come on, you could do it. And he did get a picture with him, but other than that, I don't know how much the Highlander happened.
All right. So that being said, what's going on in the future? Obviously we have the All-Star game. We will have the World Cup group stages coming up. So, some news weeks for Overwatch League stuff, we're probably going to be on the slower end. So, you can expect to see a little bit of adjustments for us focusing on some of the other esports stuff going on in the meantime. But obviously, as soon as any Overwatch League news drops, we will definitely be covering it. But expect more analysis on some of the other majors going on here in the upcoming months ahead. So who knows? Like, maybe we'll throw in some new segments to test out, or some team building.
You know what really grinds my gears?
What?
I don't know. I got to write the rest of the segment.
Oh, damn! I thought you had something.
No, it's actually been a pretty good week, so I'm not. I have no gears to grind right now, but give me a week and I'll have something.
Absolutely. All right. Well, with that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and close out the show for tonight. So if you guys want to help us out, one of the best ways to do that is to leave us a positive review over on iTunes. We're always looking for ways to improve the show to make for a better listening experience for you guys. As a reminder, as always, we have Overwatch Recall. That is our list of several Overwatch, Overwatch League, and Path to Pro podcasts out there. That's available on our website, so every Sunday night we release an episodic listing of all the latest content. So be sure to follow Recall on Twitter at OWRecall. And we actually just dropped our first episode of that podcast earlier today, where I had interviewed Thornrain and Kyle Wynn from the Blackwatch Report, which is High Noon's Path to Pro podcast. So had a good time there, so definitely go check that out. We also set up a provider page on iTunes, so like when you search for Overwatch League Network, and you click on like our name, it should show all of our podcasts. It's not like all on one feed, but it's just an easier way for you to bounce between our different content out there. So keep an eye on that. But Spider, why don't you go ahead and let our listeners know where they can get a hold of the podcast and ourselves over on the social media?
Sure. If you'd like to email the show, you can do it at contact@owlnshow.com. If you want to find us on Twitter or Instagram, it's at @OWLNshow. Our website, www.owlnshow.com. Our YouTube page is getting really close to the 100 subscribers. We need to get the custom URL, but for now you can search Overwatch League Network on YouTube. We put out a lot of hamster videos last week, as pretty much every Overwatch channel did, but check ours out because they're the best. And I'm not just saying that because I made them. You can find our Discord at discord.me/OWLNshow. You can find our Twitch page at twitch.tv/OWLNshow. If you're listening to the audio, you should really tune in and see our beautiful faces. You can find our core show, which is our Monday night at 7 p.m. PDT, Overwatch League Network. It is where we talk about Overwatch League, and it's what you're currently listening to. We have our variety Overwatch show, which is Wednesdays at 5 p.m. PDT, Heroes Never Die, where they talk about pretty much everything else related to Overwatch, all in one handy-dandy show. The only problem with that show is Ednar's on that show, and I have to pick on him every chance I get, especially since I know he's not in chat anymore. We have our Tier 2 Path to Pro Contenders show Thursdays at 7 p.m. PDT. That is the back cap. And then we also do some host streams. I skipped last week because I had a lot of stuff going on, as I mentioned earlier.
There was also, the grand finals.
Right. I mean, I would have started after the finals, but all the stuff going on in real life took precedence. So I will be back this week with finishing my placements on Fart Basket, and that should start around 10:30 PDT. And then Totem did some arcade shenanigans last week with Edinar. I think you'll probably do something similar this week, I would assume. Saturdays at 10:30, or I guess 7:30 PDT. So you can tune to that. And then, as you mentioned, we also have the recall going out. I think that's going to be every other week?
Yeah, it's every other Monday.
Okay. So you can find myself on Twitter at SpiderGD. You can find Slambo somewhere. I mean, we can find him. But if you want to reach out to him and make sure he's still okay, and see how the president of gaming for Atlanta is doing, you can find him at Slambo Overwatch.
All right, well, as for myself, you can find me on Twitter at TumblingDrunkCTR, and of course, if I'm streaming, it's live here on our podcast, Twitch, 3-4 nights a week, dependent on my schedule. But with that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and head out. Thank you so much for tuning in to Overwatch League Network. Again, this has been episode number 44. I am Tumbly Drunk, joined, as always, by my co-host, Spider, and we will see you back next week, guys. Have a good night.
Thank you for listening to the Overwatch League Network. Be sure to follow the show on Twitter at OWLNshow. The theme music for OWLN is the main theme and victory theme guitar remix by Michael Mack.